Hey YouTube, I'm Richard and welcome to Pork Chop Fabrication. Let's get building some rock sliders today. First I started out by removing the factory side steps. These are held in by 6 12mm bolts and are relatively easy to remove. Next, I measured for the rock slider itself. I measured from fender well to fender well and came out with 72 inches. I cut a piece at 70 inches, knowing that you can always take away metal, but you can never add back. I'm now measuring for the kickouts to see how far away from the frame I want the rock slider to start. Next, I'm cutting for the mounting plates. This is just 3/16 inch strip of steel. Okay, so what I'm going to be using for mounting the rock sliders to the frame are these mounting plates. They're 5" by 4.5" plates, just cut out of a strip of steel. They're 3/16 inch thick. Pretty much the kickouts are going to weld to them like this. And then the slider is going to weld out like this, and then the slider is going to have a kick out on top of that. So this is kind of how it's going to look, and this is going to be, the plate's going to be butted up against the frame. Now we could weld this and you will probably never see it, but I want to add a little bit more style than just having a square piece back there. So a really easy way to add some style, make it look like you care what you're fabricating and make it look like it's not homemade hack job, is cut some angles into it. So I got a few already pre-made. So I'm gonna cut this piece down into this piece and just add some angles and some styling to it. So if anyone's ever under the vehicle, the tube's gonna kick out from here. And it's gonna look a little bit better than just a square sheet of steel that's welded to. So I just measured in and cut angles on this, rounded the corners too, so it's not such a sharp corner on it. And then I cut some triangles out of additional 3/16 inch steel, and these are going to go up and brace the top of them like that. This is a relatively fast process, taking minimal effort. It definitely shows your craftsmanship at the end of your project. I'm going to be making 6 of these plates and 6 standoffs to mount the rock sliders to. I'm going to be using 3 on each side. And if you notice, this piece that I just made and this piece that I'd made already looks a little different. This is a sanded piece. I got rid of all this mill scale and stuff. This still has all that. It's just a coating from the factory, keep it from rusting and everything when it's hot rolled. So, got a new sanding disc. I'm just using an orbital sander, really quick. But now it's good to start welding on. I'm going to wipe it down with acetone before I actually start welding on it. I cannot stress this enough. If you're going to be TIG welding, you got to make sure everything is clean. A quick wipe down in acetone and a wire brush will save you headaches down the road. Before I weld any pieces completely together, I like to tack them in opposite corners first. This prevents the piece from pulling in any direction and knocking itself out of square. As you weld, it causes the metal to pull towards the weld. This results in your finished product being out of square and could cause some big problems down the road. I have found that the more tacks you put on, the less the piece will move as you weld it. One of the biggest keys to TIG welding and even MIG welding is before you start, make sure you're in a comfortable position. Because depending on the piece you're welding, you might have to hold that position for a while. If you're in a relaxed position where it's not causing strain on your body, it's easier to hold that throughout your welding process. That way you don't become fatigued midway through your bead. Now I'm measuring center of my rock slider to weld in my first kick out. I've decided to work center out on these rock sliders. Makes it easy to duplicate my process on the driver's side. After measuring center, I sand down the mill scale so I can get a good weld. When clamping on a brace for pieces you're working on, you want to make sure you can still get to where you need to weld and don't want to block it with the clamp or any bracing you have in place at the time. Before my final weld, I check for square. I noticed this piece pulled slightly to the right when I tacked it. I decided to weld the left side first, in hopes it would pull it back into square. I added this adjustable piece on my welding table that pulls out so I can drop things in between and also still keep them laying flat when I need to weld them. Now that the center post is completely welded in, I'm measuring for the two other posts. I decided to go with 12 inches inward from the outside of the rock slider, front and rear. it's back to the bench and starting the process all over again for the other two pieces. Mark, sand, mark again, check square, tack, check square again, and weld in. One of the reasons why I decided to go with TIG welding these instead of MIG welding is the cleanup process is a lot easier. It's a little bit more time consuming, but it doesn't leave berries all over and it creates a clean finished look. I'll probably end up MIG welding them to the frame, but for the part itself, it's completely TIG welded throughout. I place the rock slider back on the vehicle to check fitment, as well to start measuring for the top tube. I'm using scrap pieces of steel to use as a guide. This allows me to easily duplicate my measurements on the bench and also repeat the measurements for the driver's side. One of my previous jobs was to do production line welding in machines. I learned that jigs are a lifesaver, especially when you're making more of one. This creates a fast process and less thinking. Trust me, the less I have to think and measure, the faster and easier this project goes. After checking door fitment, I look at how far it pushes out from the body for protection. Now I'm measuring for the tubes to connect the top tube down to the main square tubing. I'm using a bevel to get my angle. Once I got the angle set with the bevel, I used an angle finder. The angle came out to about 28 degrees of a kick up. I put that angle into my saw and I start cutting the pieces I need. Once the pieces are cut, I bring them back to my mock-up jig and I mark where I need the hole saw to be. I'm just using some black Sharpie and holding it in place. This will give me an easy visual. Here's a little cheater. I'm using a one size bigger, sliding it over the tubing I'm using for the supports, and I'm marking it. This allows you to get a clean line all the way across. That way, no matter what way the tube's facing, you can see the line. This is just a cheap and easy Harbor Freight tube notcher with the Milwaukee hole dozer on it. If you're using the Harbor Freight tube notcher, just be aware there might be some shimming required. I had to run washers under the tube clamp so the hole saw would cut center. But for $50, you really can't beat the price, especially for home use. Now I'm measuring on my top tube where I want these supports to lay. I'm running 2 supports, and then on the end I'm running a 45-degree support on each side. I'm going from center out, just like I did on the base tube, and I'm going 16 inches in between each support. If I could do this all over again, I'd probably run 3 supports in between, but hindsight's 20/20. Now I cut the top tube to 5 feet. Later on, off camera, I cut it down ½ an inch on each side. Along with the bottom tube that was at 70 feet, I took 2 inches off the front and 1 inch off the back. It gave me enough room to play with, but after holding it up and looking for tire clearance, I had to do slight trimming on top and bottom tubes. I hold it up once again to check for proper fitment. This is where I realized it was a little too long for my liking. I check for wheel clearance as well as door clearance. The back end will need to be slightly trimmed on the plastic cladding. When welding tubing, I like to tack in 4 corners, 12, 3, 6, and 9. Just imagine if you're looking at a clock. This tends to keep it square as you weld. Then I like to weld each quarter of the clock. This makes it easy on the wrist, so you don't have to rotate and get in an awkward position. Like I said before, make sure when you weld comfortable. Welding a full half circle can strain the wrist a bit towards the end. Thanks for following along part 1 of the fabrication process for the rock sliders on my 2004 4Runner.